The Irish potato famine lasted for 3 years. In the end, the famine killed 1 million people, 1 out of every 8 people in Ireland.
So the Irish famine is, in a way, the great cautionary tale of putting all your eggs in one basket, and the great cautionary tale about monocultures of all kinds. It's a parable about the importance of biodiversity and the dangers of monoculture. And it's a parable we forget at our peril, but in fact, we're in the process of forgetting today.
And what's making us forget is one of our favorite foods. Each year, Americans consume about 7.5 billion pounds of French fries. They are the most popular fast food in the country.
We love our French fries. We like them really long. McDonald's kind of pioneered that beautiful red box and the long French fries that have to be tall enough to kind of sprout out of the box like a little bouquet of potato flowers.
And to make those long French fries, the fast food industry relies almost exclusively on one variety of potato, the russet Burbank.
And that's what McDonald's buys all over the world, because McDonald's wants people to have the same experience, the same beautiful golden McDonald's French fries, whether you're in Prague or London or Beijing or New York or Idaho.
McDonald's buys its French fries from potato processing companies like the J.R. Simplot Company. This is one of its plants in Nampa, Idaho.
The potato we process the most is the russet Burbank. The russet Burbank gives us pretty much the ideal quality attributes if we're going to convert them into the product that our customer wants.
So you see how monocultures on the plate lead to monocultures on the land, and that a desire for something like that perfect French fry has a whole, carries a whole chain of consequences all the way back to the farm.
This Idaho farm, whose fields extend for nearly 100 miles, is run by Ryan Cranny and his family.
How much did it rain? I think he only had about 2 tans.
Like most Idaho potato farmers, the Crannys sell most of their crop to the processing companies that make frozen French fries.
If you want to get him in before they get frozen, then we need to keep digging.
So to satisfy their customers, the Crannys grow mostly russet Burbanks.
Well, that'll make good French fries.
I think there are other varieties that are easier to grow, but that's what the consumer demands is the russet Burbank, and I'd be shot for suggesting otherwise.
Despite the demand for russet Burbanks, the business of growing them is far from a sure thing. Each year, Cranny and his family have to shell out millions of dollars for water, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, and labor. But they have little control over the price their potatoes will sell for at harvest time.
It's very risky growing crops. We had some really huge losses economically here on the farm. I don't even like to think about it, how bad it was. Alrighty. A lot of the people in the community, farmers that we grew up with, that have been here as long as we have, no longer have their operations. Many of us, the only way we could survive was to remortgage our farms and remortgage our land, and that's how we stayed in business. You can only dip into the well for so long until the well goes dry. And many of us have been to that point.
Well, it's not too bad here because you're running enough volume. They're flowing pretty good.
In addition to the economic perils he faces, Cranny must contend with biological adversaries, the insects, fungi, and viruses that prey on his plants. And his russet Burbanks are especially vulnerable because they are grown in a monoculture, just like the lumper potatoes were back in Ireland. If an enemy can kill one of Cranny's russet Burbanks, it can kill them all.
Well, our role as a farmer is to help the plant outcompete the different pests, whether that be weeds or whether it be insects or a fungus of some sort. It's a constant battle that we have to fight those off and to protect against those. It's a race to the finish line, and whether the pests win or whether the potato plant wins.
To help his potatoes win that race, Cranny, like the great majority of large-scale potato growers in the United States, uses chemical pesticides. The chemicals the Crannies use can be toxic,
Put your gloves on.
but they follow EPA guidelines that establish levels that are considered safe to use.
I don't necessarily like to apply the insecticides or any chemical of any sort, but it's something that needs to be done in order to keep the plants healthy.
We don't use a chemical unless we need to, and it's kind of by prescription, by field. So you just don't go in and just blanket excessive amounts of chemicals and fungicides on. If that potato doesn't need any, we won't apply it. If it does, we do. You know, we love our children too, and we don't want to put anything on the food that we eat anymore to taint it for us any more than you.
You know, the control of nature is expensive. To spray all those pesticides, to have 10 sprayings of fertilizer over the course of the season, to water, to buy all that water and pump all that water, it's enormously expensive. These farmers are really living on very thin margins and very little room for error. And, you know, it's easy for us to sit here and criticize them for spraying these chemicals on our food, but the fact is, if they were to give up on a single spraying, they risk their livelihood.
In 1995, Ryan Cranny and farmers like him welcomed the news of an agricultural breakthrough that promised to cut down their use of sprays. Monsanto, the world's biggest biotechnology company, came up with a much less toxic method for killing one of the potato's most deadly enemies, the Colorado potato beetle, which can pick the leaves off a plant virtually overnight.
Colorado potato beetle worldwide is probably the most serious insect pest in potatoes. We still estimate that, you know, out in the western U.S. and probably across the U.S. as a whole, about 40% of the insecticides that were applied for Colorado potato beetle control.
Monsanto's innovation was to create a new kind of potato called the new leaf potato. It was the first potato to be genetically engineered to contain genes from a different biological species.
Genetic engineering is a radically new technology compared to traditional breeding. It allows us to move genes without regard to species barriers. It allows us to move a gene from a butterfly, into a corn plant, from a starfish into a wheat plant.
Monsanto's new leaf potato used a gene from a common soil bacterium, one that makes a protein that kills potato beetles without causing harm to humans. The bacterium is called Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT for short. To help market its BT potato, Monsanto hired plant physiologist Michael Thornton to be one of its liaisons to farmers in Idaho.